The NTSB preliminary report is out on the Honda jet that crashed on the 5th of November, killing 5 individuals, including one driver, on Greenfield Road. So far, they've found nothing wrong with the jet that could have precluded a normal takeoff. Let's check it out. The accident occurred on the 5th of November, and the weather was good and the runway was dry. The plan was to fly from Falcon Field, Mesa, Arizona, up to Provo, Utah to attend a college basketball game. That's a distance of about 405 nautical miles, and is about an hour and a half long trip in the Honda jet. According to the survivor, they intended to return to Falcon Field that night and did not pack any luggage. A friend assisted the occupants as they entered the airplane and prepared for the flight, and according to the friend, the pilot had fueled the airplane from a private fuel tank prior to the flight. He did not know how much fuel specifically was added, but the pilot communicated to him that there was sufficient fuel for the flight and that they would refuel at Provo before returning, so a relatively light load for the aircraft overall. 5 people on board. The friend did not observe the airplane take off. A quick look at the specs of the Honda jet has a useful load of about 3,400 pounds, 5 people at 200 pounds each, call that 1,000 pounds. And the fuel, for the short flight up there, get fuel and come back, call it 200 gallons times 6 pounds per gallon, roughly 1,200 pounds worth of fuel, 2,200 pounds total, considerably less than the 3,400 pound useful load for the aircraft. So the aircraft was not overloaded and there was no luggage. We have a little construction going on here at the BLANCOLIRIO global headquarters in the background. The SD card was recovered from the Garmin avionics suite on board the aircraft and recorded some basic flight parameters and corroborated this NTSB data that the aircraft did accelerate up to 133 knots before rejecting the takeoff. And it recorded that data point right about here on the runway, which is just about 2,200 feet from the end of the runway. 133 knots is well above your V1 takeoff decision speed, normally listed in this article of about 110 knots. It's even above your rotate speed and your V2 takeoff safety speed of a recommended 120 knots. Now again, these numbers vary depending on the load, the elevation of the airport, and the runway length. The aircraft departed the runway at over 85 knots of ground speed, went through the dirt and grass, penetrated the perimeter fence, entered the roadway here at Greenfield Road, struck a car, and came to a rest next to the orange trees on the far side of the road. The fuselage was fractured just forward of the leading edge of the wing, and the rest of the aircraft was fairly well left intact, and of course a post-crash fire ensued. Once the aircraft was cleared for takeoff, there was no further transmissions from the pilot, and it appears that the aircraft accelerated normally. The wreckage was examined on scene before being moved to a secure location for additional evaluation. Flight control continuity was verified from the cockpit to all flight control surfaces, and all major components of the airplane were identified at the accident site. There was no evidence of any parts separating from the airplane prior to the airplane impacting the perimeter fence. The control column gust lock was located and it was uninstalled. The gust lock was not installed. That was not the problem. The airplane brake and anti-skid system was examined and no anomalies were noted. So far, they found nothing wrong with the airplane. And on the SD card recovered from the Garmin avionics suite, no engine anomalies were noted in the data. Now, the flight log data does not record any systems warnings. But remember, there's a takeoff warning system in the Honda jet. And on our first video about this accident, we reviewed the takeoff warning system. Under the following conditions, a takeoff config warning will alert when the thrust levers are advanced for takeoff while on the ground. If the aircraft flaps, speed brake, parking brake, or trims are not configured in the approved takeoff position, or if the wing anti-ice temperature is below the normal operating temperature with the system selected on. So if the crew or if the pilot had not set the proper flap setting or trim setting for takeoff, this takeoff configuration warning would have warned the pilots of that before they took off. And of course, all this information was removed from the wreckage and sent to the NTSB Recorder's Laboratory for download and additional scrutiny. So the NTSB always breaks it down into a review of the man, the machine, and the environment. Well, so far there's been nothing found wrong with the machine. The weather was perfect. So now we're down to the pilots. Who was flying this aircraft at the time of the accident, and why did he elect to reject the takeoff well above V1 takeoff decision speed? And again, the only reason a captain would ever reject a takeoff at high speed is if they felt that for some reason the aircraft was unable to fly. Well, so far we can't find any reason that would have prevented this aircraft from flying. Some of the initial reports indicate that it was Rustin Randall who was piloting the aircraft, age 48, but if we do a FAA pilot database search on Rustin, we find that he has no ratings and only a third-class medical. Also on board the airplane is Spencer James Lindahl, who has a private pilot's license, single-engine land, multi-engine land, and instrument rated, and is type rated for the Cessna Citation Mustang jet and the Honda jet. The aircraft is registered to an LLC called Iceman Holdings, and according to the Arizona Corporation Commission, both Spencer and Rustin are listed on that LLC. Because this aircraft did not have a cockpit voice recorder, we may never figure out why this pilot elected to reject this takeoff at much too high of a speed, even well above V2 takeoff safety speed. In my opinion, if you can afford the $5 million jet, you could certainly afford to pay a professional pilot to fly you and your family around in your own private jet. It seems that so many of these accidents that we cover involving these expensive personal aircraft involve aircraft that are owned privately and operated by private pilots getting themselves in trouble operating an aircraft, oftentimes in which they are over their head in operating. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.